Welcome to Atmospheric Tales, a podcast that amplifies stories and experiences related to air pollution and climate change from around the world. I'm your host Shazad Khani, and welcome to another episode of Atmospheric Tales. Our guest today is an assistant researcher at University Institute of Lisbon in Portugal. For over a decade, her research has focused on adopting a critical approach to examine the relation between representation, identities, power, discourse, and communication and social change, namely regarding public participation in environmental issues and public responses to renewable energy and associated technology. She has 80 plus published works and is a co-editor of the journal Papers on Social Representations. I'm excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Susana Batel. Our interview today is Nyasha Milansi. She's an undergraduate student in electrical and electronics engineering at Ashishi University. Her research focuses on developing low-cost sensors for use in air quality monitoring and dust soiling on solar PV measurements. Welcome to the show, Susana and Nyasha.
Thank you for your kind introduction, Shazad. I'm excited to dive in our discussion. The shift to less carbon-intensive and more sustainable energy system is centered on renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, hydro, biofuels, and others. According to the International Energy Agency, over 2022 to 2027, renewables are forecasted to grow by almost 2,001 gigawatts, equal to the entire installed solar power capacity of China today. This rapid expansion of renewables has brought us here in discussing about renewable energy colonialism with Dr. Susana Batel. Welcome to the show, Dr. Susana. I'm going to jump right into our first question on renewable energy colonialism in the Global South. In the Global South, renewable energy colonialism perpetuates power dynamics that prioritize the energy needs of the Global North over the energy needs of the Global South. Despite the fact that many countries in the Global South lack access to electricity, for example, 597 million Africans did not have access to electricity and rely on harmful forms of energy such as biomass for cooking. Approximately 600,000 lives are lost each year in sub-Saharan Africa due to exposure to biomass smoke. The focus of renewable energy production in these regions is often centered around exports to the Global North. This is evident in the case of green hydrogen, where the potential for energy poverty alleviation in Africa is overshadowed by the emphasis on export to the European market. For example, I quote a statement from the European Investment Bank website. Large-scale green hydrogen generation will enable Africa to supply 25 million tons of green hydrogen to global energy markets, equivalent to 15% of current gas used in the European Union. Dr. Susana, the followers of the podcast would like to know how colonialism mechanisms are at play here, and also how can their governments and policymakers prioritize the energy needs in their respective countries before they can look into feeding energy-rich countries, particularly in the Global North.
Thank you, Nyasha, for your question, and also Shazad for the introduction and the invitation to both of you to be here. So that's a very question, and actually this focus on green hydrogen is a very relevant one. And actually, even here in Portugal, from where I'm speaking, we're also having now this rush into this new goal, so say, of the green hydrogen as a key solution to resolve climate change. And actually, even if we are in the global north, but still in the south of Europe, so a peripheral region as well, that is also shaped by power relations with other northern countries. And so actually we're also having exactly the same debate now. So green hydrogen, is it green first off? And that's what I will get to in a minute as well. So the way it is produced, can we really say it is green? And also for whom? Also for whom is this national strategy being proposed and fostered? So thinking about Africa and sub-Saharan Africa specifically, and again also this now run for green hydrogen, a lot of issues come to play here that make us think of it as this renewable energy colonialism. So one of them is precisely even starting, as I was saying, by this notion of renewable energy colonialism. Allowing us to think for whom is this being produced. As I was saying, is also the case for Portugal. So if we look at the rhetoric even behind these efforts and agendas to foster the production of green hydrogen, we see that precisely a lot of it is with a view towards economic growth and towards exporting it to the global north. So local regions and communities where it will be produced, and also their local resources based on which their livelihoods depend a lot, such as water, land, agricultural land, and so on and so forth. They will be damaged and taken for this purpose, but with most of the benefits then to be exported, as you said, to other countries and other regions of the world, specifically in the global north. So that's already a key aspect, obviously, of what makes it renewable energy colonialism. And what that first aspect brings to the fore as well is precisely this issue that it is being sold as green, but actually, for instance, as you also highlighted, it uses water to produce this green hydrogen. And this means in turn that you should be in a region to produce it that is very there's very abundant water, and if not, you're not only probably contributing to further desertify that area, but even to there's also uncertainty what will be the consequences for water resources in the area as well out of this process for green hydrogen production. The other key issue that is being debated as well, also related then within renewable energy colonialism, is precisely that then for it to be green, it implies that the electricity generated to part this water and make the green hydrogen, it needs to come from renewable energy sources. And what this often implies is then that there will have to be built large-scale energy infrastructures such as big wind farms or solar plants and so on and so forth, that will then feed into this green hydrogen production, which in turn, these plants as well, they also have often, they also come with a lot of local impacts and impacts for communities. And if they are not deployed in a way that involves everyone and the local communities, regional communities and national communities, etc., then those harms will for sure be even more. No? So often what happens is precisely that, is that there are no benefits for the local communities and there are only detrimental effects. So it's often done through this top-down, technocentric and extractivist perspective and approach. And that means precisely that who benefits then from green hydrogen and all its components, so to say, is mostly the big corporations that often are financing these infrastructures, and also sometimes the national governments that allow for this to happen in their territories. So in this sense, I think that if we think about how can governments and policymakers then prioritize the energy needs of local communities and citizens in their respective countries before they look into feeding energy rich countries, is precisely by contesting this type of rationale and process that leads to the deployment of these large energy infrastructures and these that feed these big agendas for green hydrogen as it is being done. So I think precisely what needs to be done is thinking more in a decentralized way, in a way in which thinking about how can we give electricity to everyone and to all communities is done involving those communities and involving people, and therefore thinking about and for the country and the region where these governments and these communities are located, instead of just thinking about economic growth at a national state level, let's say. So that is really for the state and not for its citizens.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Susana, for your answer. And I think you did a great job in analyzing this question. And I would just like to highlight some of the points that you brought up, which includes, for example, we don't talk about, let's say, if we deploy these huge amounts of energy infrastructures, which will require abundant water. For example, in the case of green hydrogen, it's going to lead into water scarcity, and many regions in Africa, there's already a water scarcity because of climate-induced droughts in these recent years. So it's important to look at also the after effects, and also we talk about asking a critical question like, who are these infrastructures built for? Are they built for the local community or for other people, and how ethical is that? And I think it also answers our second question that we're going to ask you on the desert project. For our podcast listeners, I'm just going to briefly read what is about. So the Desert Project was originally designed for wind farms and solar plants to be deployed in the north of Africa and Middle East to feed the European grid, which is an unequivocal example of renewable energy colonialism in the global south. So with that, I think he also talked about how this is also at play even where you are from in Portugal, where I didn't even think that any renewable energy colonialism could also happen in the global north. It is important to know that renewable energy colonialism extends beyond global north-south relationships and also operates through power dynamics between core and periphery regions. Dr. Susana, can you provide an example of renewable energy colonialism that is not specific to global north-south relations, and how do our core periphery power dynamics come into play in these cases?
Yes. So obviously, I think this renewable energy colonialism idea departs from global north, global south relations and from historical colonialism. But I think it is also very useful then to think about, if not equal, obviously, because colonialism as it has, again, a specific history and is based on specific structural power relations. But I think it's very helpful precisely to make us think as well if not equal, but similar processes are happening also in the global north. And what we see more and more also today, and also actually historically, so already for some centuries, is this continuous and even increasingly exacerbated power dynamics between urban areas and rural areas, in which basically rural areas are seen more and more as just a place for resource provision and to provide to urban areas, and urban areas as the consumers. And so it creates these core periphery dynamics that again are at the basis as well of renewable energy colonialism between the global north and the global south. And what we see, for instance, again in Portugal, but also in other countries in the global north, is that is happening also in the relation between then the urban and rural territories, in which basically, as I was discussing regarding green hydrogen and the deployment of large-scale renewable energy generation infrastructures in these more rural areas, what happens is that rural areas are almost these sacrifice zones that get all the costs and all the negative impacts of the construction of these infrastructures, and they don't get any benefits. They're not involved in deciding about those projects. They do not allow them, even for local communities, even sometimes to stay in their communities and to thrive in those communities in the long term. So it's a similar type of dynamics that happens here as well. And for instance, here in Portugal, I've been accompanying it regarding wind hydropower plants and how actually throughout the last century, this has been the case. Now, these large, huge, really infrastructures with a lot of impacts have been constructed and deployed in rural areas, inland territories, with a lot of impacts for the local communities. And often even what happens is that they are deployed based on discourses and rhetoric of local socioeconomic development, and they are even sold almost as these promises and myths of development that people then are attracted to, because precisely they want to stay in the places where they live and they like to live, and they want to be able for future generations to also be able to stay in those territories and to thrive there. And so people tend often even to accept these infrastructures as a sign of hope, almost towards that future. But actually then what we see is that often that's it. That's just rhetoric from the developers, from the politicians and governments that support these infrastructures. And those promises then actually tend not to materialize. And so what ends by happening is that these infrastructures even further contribute to the desertification and depletion of these areas in terms of local socioeconomic development, and then the people that manage to stay and live there. So in that sense, I think that this idea of renewable energy colonialism also as an analytical lens, so to say, so as some glasses to look at the renewable energy transition and which inequalities is it creating as well, and which types of further discrimination and injustices is it reproducing and creating anew. I think it's very important, both in the relations between the global north and the global south, but also within the global north. And I think for that also something very important that is important as well for the case of the green hydrogen that you were bringing to the discussion earlier, is precisely also this idea that with globalization and the neoliberal capitalist system that we live in, what contributes also to this colonialism and these power relations is precisely these big corporations, large corporations that are often foreign to the countries where they are exploring and extracting these resources and exploring these communities. And therefore, they really don't have their interests at heart. No? So it's often deployment of infrastructures and these extractive activities in a very, colonialist and extractivist way, with no connection and no concerns for local communities.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think in Portugal is all the hydro energy is or dams are a great example of what you just are describing of energy colonialism in Portugal. And with that, I think I'm going to ask you a question in relation to the USA and the world. So given the significant amount of land that will be required for wind farms to meet energy for consumption needs, how do you think we can balance the need for renewable energy with concerns around the land use and ecological impacts?
Yes, so that's a very good question. And I think that also, again, it links to the first question that we were talking about. And I think it's really going forward. What we need is also a more degrowth mindset and economy and perspective. So I think even when we think about the right to have access to energy, and that everyone in the world can access that right. That needs to be thought about through also considering that some people in the world, and specifically in the global north, really need as well to reduce their consumption of energy, and the modern way of life, or as some authors put it, this imperial mode of living, that is typical of the global north, and that if you look even at some of the sustainable development goals and some of the policies that the European Union is supporting towards the green and digital transitions, actually they don't want to change that imperial mode of living. No, so they want to just continue with business as usual, and renewable energy technologies within this format, within this logic, will just be continuing this economic growth model. No, and that for sure it will again reproduce existence inequalities. It will reproduce energy poverty. So the ones that were previously poor in different dimensions will most probably continue in being poor, because precisely the modus operandi, so to say, is exactly the same as our fossil societies that are anchored and based in structural colonialism and inequalities, racism, sexism, and all of these structural, again, inequalities that are constitutive of this model of neoliberal capitalism of our society. So therefore, I think the problem that needs to be tackled is precisely that, is to always think about these issues in conjunction, and so thinking that we really need the growth perspective to allow us as well for moving forward with the renewable energy transition, but in a way that is more equal to all, and that also allows for more participation and engagement of everyone in that process. And for that, we need more decentralized models for the energy transition. We need to take decisions closer to communities that will be affected by that. We need to think precisely about energy transitions that can be done more at that community and regional level, because even that's what allows us to prevent this global north, global south renewable energy colonialism. Right, because the problem here is often that that we in the models we use nowadays, we can be producing and extracting resources and energy from certain places that are very far away from the places where they will be consumed. And so obviously that also helps with losing the trace of the negative impacts that even, for instance, getting rare earth minerals that are needed for wind farms have for local communities that are far away from where those wind farms are going to be deployed. So again, I think it's the key might be precisely in thinking more about renewable energy transitions through this logic of the growth on one hand, and decentralization and this ethics of care for everyone at a global level and at the local level, all at the same time, in an integrated way.
Thank you so much. Portugal is at the forefront of the renewable energy transition. In 2021, approximately 5,000 gigawatts hour of electricity was generated in Portugal, of which 88.5% from renewable sources, and including roughly 45% generated by hydropower, mostly large-scale dams. Can you give examples of community contestations against hydropower plants in Portugal, and also some examples of health-related harm or psychological harm provoked by hydropower infrastructure?
So as I was saying, we've been with some colleagues doing some research on hydropower plants projects and how they were deployed throughout the last century. And so that means throughout the dictatorship that was imposed in Portugal for several decades, and then from that through to the democratic period that started in 1974 and still today. And what we see is precisely that something similar in the deployment of these infrastructures throughout these different socio-political regimes is that they are deployed in this logic of progress and of economic growth that is characteristic of capitalism. And it is that logic that also makes it, with obviously the very big differences between the socio-political regimes for individual freedoms and democratic ideals and rights, But that transversal aspect of capitalism makes it precisely that then these infrastructures are similarly deployed in a way that disregards the impacts they have for local communities, for local socio-ecological systems as well. And therefore, they create, obviously, a lot of psychosocial negative impacts as well in the communities living nearby them. It was interesting, for instance, because a lot of this research to look at psychosocial impacts in the beginning of last century, for instance, we had to go to archival materials to see how these psychosocial impacts were documented. And it was interesting, for instance, to see that in the 1950s or even 1960s, for instance, these dams were a completely non-existent idea for local communities. And so local communities thought of them as a cut in the river, which is quite interesting to think about. That's precisely what it is having like this wild river that lives in harmony with the communities nearby them, and that is being almost cut and slaughtered in a way by these large dams. And so in a lot of this work, we've documented precisely that type of psychosocial impact. That's it. It happens a lot, obviously, when dams submerge villages, and that has happened also even in Portugal's recent history, that entire villages had to be relocated somewhere else because of the construction of these dams. But dams affect also other local communities that, even if they don't have to relocate or their houses are submerged, that live nearby them, because they really affect the local environment and the livelihoods, therefore, that are dependent on it. Of the surrounding local communities. And then what we managed to do with this archival research as well, which was very important too, was precisely to also then unearth almost, so bring to the fore and give voice to actually contestations to these hydropower plants that somehow also happened during the dictatorship, so many decades ago, even if obviously in a very different way than what they could be or how they could happen in the democratic period. But again, through these almost oral history materials, we managed to identify that there were communities and people that were against these dams and that would like to contest the construction of these dams then. And that has continued again from then to nowadays, not only with hydropower projects still that are presented often in public policies and by the Portuguese government as renewable energy, but again, more and more activists and academics have contested that notion, precisely because we know nowadays of the many social, environmental impacts, negative impacts that large dams can create. And so more and more they are less considered, at least in these contexts, as renewable energy. But on top of that, also more recently, we have witnessed the same type of impacts by wind farms and more recently now by solar plants. So now the push in Portugal is, as I said, also for this green hydrogen idea, but that hasn't really started yet, at least in a more material way. But also what has been happening more in the last years is the deployment of these large, huge solar plants as well. And that has also been very contested by communities, precisely because, for instance, we have this case in Alentejo in the south of Portugal, where a community started to develop and implement this idea of a renewable energy community, in which you, so as a community, you try to make it self-sufficient from an energy point of view by having solar panels, say, that at the community scale or even at the household scale that are enough to make that community self-sufficient. And so they picked up on this idea of renewable energy communities that is also trying to be fostered in Portugal and at the European Union level through specific legislation and all that. And then soon after they started to try and develop and implement this renewable energy community, they just heard that a huge solar plant precisely to feed into this green hydrogen idea, or that would be one of the purposes of it at least, or could be. So this huge solar plant would be built also very near where this renewable energy community was trying to be developed. And obviously, this made this community to contest that solar plant, precisely because what often local communities want is these more smaller scale decentralized options, and not these large scale infrastructures that ruin the landscape, ruin the symbolic and cultural relations that they and attachments that they establish with those places and with those landscapes, and also sometimes even farming land and other uses of the land that are significant to the local communities and to local livelihoods.
Thank you so much, Dr. Susana. So another interesting dimension to renewable energy acceptance is the concept of NIMBY. Can you briefly talk about the concept NIMBY, which is not in my backyard? How are developers, policymakers, the media, and executive protesters using the NIMBY rhetorically, and what are the consequences?
A lot of the research that I've done has been precisely looking at how this NIMBY or NIMBY idea is used by developers and politicians, the media as well sometimes, to basically accuse local communities that oppose these infrastructures of being just irrational and ignorant and selfish. So it's a way for them to delegitimize that opposition by saying, well, you're only opposing that solar plant, for instance, or that hydropower plant because you are a NIMBY, because you are being selfish, because you live next to it. Now, if it was being built somewhere else, you wouldn't care about it. And actually what research has been showing more and more is that NIMBY doesn't stand out as an explanatory framework, so to say, for local opposition, for local communities' opposition to these renewable energy infrastructures. It actually doesn't fit. No, it's not a good explanation, precisely because what research has shown more and more is that what is at stake is the fact that these processes are made in a very top-down, imposing and even dictatorial way, so to say. So they're not up for discussion. They don't involve conveniently the local communities and all the other stakeholders that will be affected by these projects. As we've already discussed a little bit here also, what happens is that even when there are some public consultation processes, those are very tokenistic. So they actually, might then involve slight little changes in the projects, but not, for instance, a real discussion about if the project should go ahead or not in that specific location or somewhere else. And so on and so forth. And so in this way, the people in local communities, obviously, they feel powerlessness and they feel disempowered even from deciding about their own lives, their own communities, sometimes even in the case of the submersion of villages through hydropower plants, as we've seen, even they lose the control and the autonomy over their own houses and households. So obviously, it's all these dimensions of injustice that creates local opposition, and that's what activists and researchers have been increasingly making more clear, and showing that it is not about NIMBY, it is not about people not knowing what can be the benefits of hydropower plants, or just reacting emotionally because it's being built close to them, but it's about them knowing what is important for them and for their local communities and for their culture. So researchers are only even more recently, being more aware also of the dangers of using NIMBY as an explanation. And again, actually, even for researchers, as I've also highlighted in a lot of my work, that move is only now starting to happen. But for developers and even for, as I said, politicians, governments, local authorities, the media, NIMBY is still very often used to just dismiss when local communities oppose these infrastructures. And obviously, it is very helpful for them to precisely dismiss and delegitimize local communities' opposition. And so that's why I think it is helpful to more and more not use the concept of NIMBY or only use it to show how actually we are talking about issues of injustice when people oppose these energy infrastructures, and trying to engage policymakers and local authorities and developers more and more through this lens of injustice and the inequalities these projects often create.
Thank you, Dr. Susana. It was really wonderful having you here on this episode. I really enjoyed talking to you, discussing about energy, colonialism in the global south, in global north as well. I would really like to thank you for taking a time to come and share your over a decade experience with us.
Thank you so much, Nyasha. It was really great to discuss these issues with you. And thank you for all the very important questions that you brought to our conversation as well.
And thank you, Shafa, for hosting us today.
With that, I would like to thank our guest, Dr. Susana Batel, and our interviewer, Nyasha Milanse, for joining us on this episode of Atmospheric Tales. Thanks to all our listeners for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe and share.